Ethan sat alone in his large, dimly lit house. Rain tapped softly against the windows and the wind howled around the corners of the old building. Inside, the house was silent except for the occasional creak of the wooden floors and the soft ticking of an old clock on the mantelpiece. The rooms were furnished neatly, but there was no warmth, no laughter, no sense of life. Everything was in its place almost too perfectly, as if Ethan feared leaving anything out of order. He had lived here for almost 10 years since the last time he had let someone close. People in town whispered about him. Some called him cold, others said he was strange, but Ethan never cared. He had chosen this life of solitude because the world had once hurt him deeply. He remembered a time when he had friends, when his home was filled with laughter, and when he could trust people. But that life had ended. People had disappointed him, people he loved had left, and he had learned that being alone hurt less than being betrayed. Ethan's days followed a strict routine. He would wake early, make his own breakfast, tend to his house, and walk in the quiet forest that surrounded his home. He rarely went to town except when absolutely necessary. He avoided social events and avoided people because interacting with them reminded him of old pain. He thought he was fine. He told himself that loneliness was better than heartbreak. And yet every evening as he sat by the fireplace with a book in hand, he felt a small nagging emptiness, a quiet ache that would not go away. One rainy afternoon, as the clouds pressed heavy against the sky, there came a knock at the door. Ethan froze. He did not often hear visitors, and the sudden sound startled him. He rose slowly, his boots echoing in the hall as he approached the door. The rain had soaked the doormat, and drops of water fell from the roof onto the stone steps. When he opened the door, he saw a young girl standing there. She was no older than 17, with dark hair tied neatly in a braid and eyes that were wide, alert, and curious. She held a small bag in one hand and seemed nervous, yet there was a quiet determination in her posture. Ethan noticed immediately that she was deaf. He could see it in the way her lips moved silently and the way she held her hands ready to communicate with gestures. "I need work," she signed carefully, her movements precise. Her lips moved as she silently mouthed words that Ethan could not hear, and she looked at him with a mixture of hope and caution. Ethan's first instinct was to turn her away. He did not allow strangers in his house. He had no time, no energy, and no desire to deal with anyone's problems. But then something made him pause. He recognized her father. The man had once been a part of Ethan's past, a man who had caused problems in town through drinking and poor decisions. He remembered the trouble that man had caused, the mistakes that had affected others, and he felt an unexpected surge of guilt. Perhaps helping the daughter could be a way to make up for the past, a way to do something right where he had once witnessed so much wrong. Ethan hesitated, staring at the girl in the rain. She did not complain or make demands. She simply waited, her eyes holding a quiet patience that both confused and unsettled him. Finally he spoke. "You can stay," he said, his voice rough from disuse. The words felt foreign in his mouth, but the relief that spread across the girl's face was immediate. She nodded, and he stepped aside to let her enter. As she stepped into the house, Ethan noticed how her presence seemed to slightly change the atmosphere. She moved with quiet confidence, careful not to disturb the order he had maintained for years. She carried her bag to the corner and set it down neatly. He watched her, noting small gestures, how she folded her coat with care, how she organized her belongings, and how she glanced around the room as if assessing her new environment. There was something calm and steady about her that contrasted sharply with the chaos he remembered from her family. Over the next few hours, Ethan showed her around the house. He explained the rules of the household as best as he could, using gestures and writing notes when necessary. She learned quickly, nodding at his instructions and moving with efficiency. It was clear she had experience with work, discipline, and independence. Ethan could not help but feel a small spark of admiration. Despite his usual suspicion of others, he found himself watching her quietly, noticing the way she approached her tasks with focus and care. She did not complain, she did not ask for special treatment, and she did not seem afraid of the house's silence. She adapted to his world without hesitation, and that alone made Ethan feel a strange sense of connection. That night, as the rain continued to fall outside, Ethan sat by the fireplace, his mind restless. He thought about Lila, the name she had written down on a note to him earlier, and about the choices that had led both of them to this moment. He had taken her in partly out of obligation, partly out of guilt, but now he realized there was something more. Her presence stirred feelings he had not felt in years: curiosity, warmth, and a faint glimmer of hope. Ethan's life had been structured around solitude, silence, and self-preservation. He had believed that walls around his heart were enough to protect him, but now with Lila in the house, the walls seemed less protective and more like barriers to something he could not yet understand. He did not know if he was ready for it, and yet a small part of him felt a longing he had buried for too long. He remembered his past, the mistakes, the friendships lost, and the quiet loneliness that had become his constant companion. He remembered nights sitting by the window staring at the stars and wishing for something, anything to fill the emptiness. And now unexpectedly Lila had arrived. She had stepped into his life not with demands or complaints, but with quiet strength and dignity. She had come seeking work, but Ethan sensed that she might bring something far more valuable: a chance at connection, understanding, and perhaps even trust. Ethan was cautious. He knew the past could repeat itself, and he had been hurt too many times to let his heart be vulnerable. Yet as he glanced toward the young girl who had quietly settled in for the night, he felt a tiny, hesitant spark of hope. Perhaps life was offering him a second chance, not just to help another person, but to rediscover the part of himself he had thought lost forever. And for the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a future where he was not entirely alone. The first few days of Lila living in Ethan's house were quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a fresh, earthy scent that seeped through the windows. Ethan had expected chaos, complaints, or awkward silences filled with tension. But instead, there was only the gentle rhythm of life slowly beginning to settle. Lila moved around the house with care. She cleaned each room meticulously, dusting surfaces, arranging books, and straightening furniture. The kitchen, once neglected and cold, began to smell faintly of herbs and baked bread as she prepared simple meals. Ethan noticed all of it but said very little. He had never liked small talk, and now with Lila, he felt strangely comfortable remaining silent. Her presence did not demand conversation, and yet it somehow filled the emptiness he had carried for so long. He observed her while she worked. Her hands moved gracefully, almost like a dance, whether she was folding clothes or wiping the counters. Ethan realized that he was learning more about her with each gesture, each subtle movement, than he could have from words. She had a quiet confidence, a calm that made him feel less tense. For the first time, he sensed that someone in his house could see the world as he did, without noise, without rushing, without the constant pressure of expectations. Communication was not easy at first. Lila used sign language, which Ethan only knew a few words of, but she also carried a small notebook, filling it with words and drawings to explain herself. She would write water or bread or please when necessary, and sometimes she would draw pictures to explain more complex ideas. Ethan had never thought much about how people could communicate without speaking, but now he found himself reading her notebook carefully, paying attention to her drawings, her signs, and even the expressions on her face. He learned slowly, fumbling at first. He would try to copy her signs, often making mistakes, and Lila would smile, correcting him with gentle patience. Sometimes she would giggle silently, her hands moving gracefully as she signed. Ethan felt a strange warmth from her laughter, even though he could not hear it. He had forgotten what it felt like to share a smile that was meant just for someone else. One afternoon, while Ethan was tending to the garden, Lila approached him with a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the edge of the forest. She held them out, her eyes bright, and signed, "For you." Ethan took the flowers a little awkwardly, but his chest felt tight with something he could not name. "Thank you," he muttered, realizing that words felt unnecessary for moments like this. He noticed that the flowers, simple and delicate, had already made the garden feel more alive, more like a home than a lonely house. Days turned into a routine. Lila would rise early, clean, prepare breakfast, and quietly go about her tasks. Ethan would sit nearby, reading or tending small projects, occasionally attempting to sign a few words to her. Slowly, a silent rhythm developed between them, a flow of life that did not require speech. It was comforting in a way that Ethan had never experienced. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ethan found Lila sitting by the fireplace with her notebook. She had drawn a picture of the house, complete with Ethan's study, the garden, and even the old clock on the mantel. Ethan looked at it, studying the lines and shapes. She had captured the essence of the place, but not as a cold, empty house. Instead, it seemed warm, almost alive. "That's good," Ethan said slowly, pointing to the drawing. Lila looked up at him and smiled. She signed, "I like it here." Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He realized that for the first time in years, someone had chosen to be here. Not out of obligation, not out of pity, but because they wanted to. And that thought made him feel both vulnerable and grateful at the same time. Their evenings often passed like this, quiet, peaceful, yet full of small, meaningful interactions. Ethan learned to recognize the subtleties of Lila's signs, and she learned to understand his gestures even when they were clumsy. Sometimes she would place a hand on his shoulder as he worked, or slide a notebook across the table for him to read. It was simple, almost ordinary, but in its simplicity, it was extraordinary for Ethan. He had forgotten how to share life with another person. Yet, despite the comfort that began to grow between them, tension remained in Ethan's heart. He could not forget Lila's father, the man who had caused so much trouble in the past. One rainy evening, just as they were finishing dinner, a shadow appeared at the door. Ethan's heart sank. Lila's father stood there unsteady, smelling of alcohol and regret. His eyes flicked between Ethan and Lila, unsure and ashamed. Ethan's first instinct was anger. He had taken responsibility for Lila's well-being, and seeing her father in this state reminded him of all the reasons he had avoided people for so long. He wanted to send the man away, to protect Lila from the disappointment and pain that he knew could follow. But Lila stepped forward, her calm gaze meeting Ethan's. She signed to him. "I can handle this." Her hands moved confidently, her eyes steady and strong. Ethan hesitated, unsure whether to trust her judgment. He had always believed that strength came from control, yet here was Lila, demonstrating it in a way he had not expected. Her father's voice was slurred as he tried to explain himself, but Lila did not react with fear or anger. She listened, nodded, and responded in simple signs. "I forgive you, but you must change." Her courage shocked Ethan. He had underestimated her, assuming that a young girl in a difficult situation would be fragile or scared. Instead, she showed resilience he could not have imagined. Ethan felt a strange mixture of relief and admiration. He realized that taking Lila in had not been just a gesture of repayment to her father. It had been a chance to witness courage, patience, and strength in its purest form. And for the first time, he wondered whether he had learned something equally important about himself. Over the next few days, the tension eased. Lila's father, though still struggling with his own issues, seemed determined to respect her boundaries. He left the house with a promise to seek help, and Lila returned inside, calm and collected. Ethan watched her, noticing how easily she moved between strength and gentleness, how her presence seemed to bring balance to the house, to him, and to the once silent corners of his heart. The more time passed, the more Ethan began to see her not as a helper or a responsibility, but as someone who made the house feel alive. He caught himself smiling more often, noticing the small joys she brought, the way she organized flowers in a vase, how she hummed silently while cooking, how she responded to him with gestures that communicated far more than words ever could. One evening, as the sun set in golden light across the garden, Ethan sat quietly, watching Lila work. He realized that their silent companionship had grown into something extraordinary. Though they had never spoken words aloud, they had found a way to understand each other, to communicate, and to share life in its simplest, most beautiful form. For the first time in years, Ethan felt hope. Not a loud, overwhelming hope, but a quiet, steady warmth that spread through him and lingered. He had taken in Lila to repay her father, to make amends for the past. But now he understood that the true gift was not in obligation, it was in connection. In the gentle, patient presence of another human being, he had found something that had been missing from his life for far too long. That night, as he watched Lila sleep peacefully in the small room he had prepared for her, Ethan realized something profound. Life could change in unexpected ways, even for someone as lonely and guarded as he was. And though he did not know what the future held, he felt ready to face it, not alone, but with someone who had quietly opened a space in his heart that he thought was closed forever. And so, life began in the house again, not with noise or chaos, But with the quiet rhythm of shared silence, trust, and understanding, a new chapter had begun, and Ethan sensed that it would change everything. Weeks had passed since Lila had arrived at Ethan's house, and the rhythms of their lives had settled into something neither of them had expected. The house, once silent and lifeless, now carried a quiet hum of activity, small movements, gestures, and moments that made it feel like a home. Ethan had begun to notice things he had long ignored: the way the sunlight fell on the floor in the mornings, the smell of fresh bread from the oven, the gentle rustle of leaves in the garden. And all of it seemed brighter because Lila was there. Lila had grown comfortable in the house. She moved through each room with ease, cleaning, cooking, and arranging things just the way she liked them. She was careful, methodical, yet she infused her work with warmth and personality. Ethan noticed how she added little touches: a vase of wildflowers by the window, a folded blanket neatly placed on the couch, even tiny sketches of animals taped to the wall near her room. Each small detail made the house feel less like a building and more like a place of life. At first, Ethan had been distant, unsure of how to interact with her. He spoke rarely, and when he did, his words were clipped. Lila, however, did not seem deterred. She communicated patiently, using her notebook, her hands, and her expressions to convey thoughts and feelings. Slowly, Ethan began to understand her. He learned the signs she used for daily tasks, the gestures for emotions, and even the subtle movements that hinted at how she felt. He found himself trying harder to communicate, sometimes fumbling with gestures or writing clumsily in her notebook, but she never corrected him harshly. Instead, she smiled, a gentle encouragement that made him feel seen in a way he had almost forgotten was possible. One evening, as rain fell softly outside, Ethan watched Lila at the kitchen table. She was carefully arranging herbs for cooking, her hands moving with precision and grace. He noticed how focused she was, the small furrow of concentration on her brow, the way her fingers paused occasionally as if she were considering every movement carefully. Ethan felt a strange warmth watching her, a sense of admiration mixed with something deeper he could not yet name. He cleared his throat awkwardly and picked up a pen and a piece of paper. Carefully he wrote, "Do you want tea?" He held it out to her. Lila looked up, her eyes lighting with understanding, and nodded. She reached for a cup and motioned for him to pour. Their interaction was small, silent, and yet it carried an intimacy that surprised Ethan. It was a connection built not on words, but on shared attention, patience, and understanding. Over time, they began to share more than chores. Ethan discovered Lila had a talent for drawing. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, he found a sketchbook she had hidden among her belongings. Its pages were filled with intricate drawings, flowers, animals, and scenes from the town she had visited. There were also sketches of the house, including rooms he had long ignored or thought dull. Her drawings gave him a new perspective on his own home, showing him beauty and details he had overlooked for years. "You're good at this," he said one day, pointing at a sketch of the garden she had done. Lila smiled and signed slowly, clearly enjoying his attempt to communicate. "I like to see things clearly," she signed. Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of connection deepen. In her quiet way, she was teaching him to notice, to slow down, to feel the world instead of just existing in it. One night, as a storm raged outside, they sat together in the living room. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Lightning illuminated the room briefly, and thunder rolled in the distance. Ethan felt a familiar tension rise in his chest, the same one he had felt as a child during storms, a mix of fear and awe. Without thinking, he reached out, and Lila placed her hand gently over his. Her presence was calming, her touch steady, and he realized he had not felt comforted in years. Not like this. They sat in silence, simply sharing the moment, letting the storm rage outside while the fire and their quiet companionship kept the house warm. Ethan felt something shift inside him. For so long, he had believed that silence was loneliness. Now he realized that shared silence could be even more profound, a form of understanding that words could never reach. Despite the peace that had settled over the house, challenges still arose. Lila's father, though distant now, remained a concern. Ethan worried about her safety and emotional well-being, even as he began to care for her in ways he had not anticipated. But Lila, with her quiet strength, reassured him in her own way. She faced him, addressed issues calmly, and handled difficulties with a maturity that surprised Ethan. He realized that she had grown resilient through her struggles, and that resilience was something he deeply admired. One afternoon, while working in the garden together, Ethan noticed a wounded bird lying among the flowers. Its wing was bent awkwardly and it struggled to move. Lila knelt beside it immediately, her hands gentle as she examined it. She signed to Ethan, "It is hurt. Can you help me?" He nodded, careful to follow her instructions, and together they tended to the bird, creating a small shelter and giving it water. Watching her care for something so fragile, Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Here was a young girl who had faced so many hardships, yet she offered kindness freely. And in her kindness he saw a reflection of what he had been missing all these years. Evenings became times for quiet learning and shared moments. Ethan taught Lila how to use small tools for household repairs, while she taught him patience and observation. They discovered routines that were comforting: breakfast by the fireplace, quiet walks in the forest, and evenings spent reading or drawing together. Ethan found himself smiling more often, laughing silently at small things she did, like the way she would hum without sound while baking, or how she carefully arranged books by color and size. Despite the silence that remained between them, Ethan felt closer to Lila than he had to anyone in years. He realized that connection was not always loud or verbal. It could be gentle, quiet, and almost invisible, yet powerful enough to change a life. Lila had taught him to see, to feel, and to understand without needing to speak. One night, Ethan sat by the window watching the stars appear in the clear sky. Lila joined him, sketchbook in hand. She drew the constellations, showing him shapes he had never noticed. "I call this one Hope," she signed, pointing to a small cluster of stars. Ethan smiled, realizing that she had a way of naming the world that made it feel more alive, more meaningful. He copied her gesture, touching the stars with his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt a quiet, unshakable sense of hope. Their bond grew stronger every day. Ethan no longer saw Lila as a housekeeper or a task to fulfill. She had become a companion, a teacher, and a friend. And though they had never spoken aloud to each other, their understanding had become deeper than any conversation could be. In her presence, he found trust, warmth, and a renewed sense of life. One afternoon, Lila sat in the garden, sketching the flowers as Ethan worked nearby. She paused, looking at him with her calm, steady gaze, and signed slowly. "You are happy now?" "Yes." Ethan paused, feeling the question deeply. He realized he had been happier in these weeks than he had been in years. He nodded, unable to find the words to respond fully, but his smile said everything. Lila smiled back, satisfied with his answer, and returned to her drawing. In these shared silences, Ethan discovered a truth he had long ignored. Loneliness was not the absence of people, but the absence of connection. And connection, he realized, did not need words. It needed patience, understanding, and a willingness to open one's heart. Lila had come into his life quietly, gently, and she had begun to fill the empty spaces he had carried for so long. By the end of the week, Ethan felt a subtle transformation. The house felt lighter, the air warmer, and his heart more open. He understood that Lila had brought something far beyond assistance. She had brought life, perspective, and hope. And in return, he found himself protecting her, caring for her, and appreciating her in ways that words could never fully express. That night, as Ethan watched Lila fall asleep in her small, cozy room, he reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to him. What had started as a gesture of repayment to her father had evolved into something extraordinary, a shared life, built not on obligation but on understanding, trust, and quiet companionship. Ethan knew that challenges would continue to come, but for the first time in years he felt ready to face them, not alone, but with someone who had quietly become the most important part of his life. And in the soft glow of the house filled with warmth, sketches, and quiet movements, he realized that shared silence could be the most profound kind of communication. The days in Ethan's house had grown long and full of small, comforting routines. Morning sunlight spilled through the windows, casting soft warmth over the floors, and the house, once so cold and silent, now carried a quiet, living energy. Lila moved with ease through her tasks, cleaning, cooking, arranging, yet each motion seemed infused with care, attention, and something almost gentle in its intent. Ethan often paused to watch her, noticing the way her hands moved, the way her eyes focused, and the faint, careful smile she gave when she felt satisfied with her work. For Ethan, these moments were unfamiliar. He had lived alone for so long that silence had become normal, almost comforting in its predictability. Yet now, with Lila in the house, silence was no longer empty, it was shared. It was a language they had created together, one that required patience, observation, and empathy. And though he had never considered himself capable of such patience, he found himself waiting for her gestures, her signs, and the small, wordless interactions that had come to fill his days. One afternoon, while Ethan was repairing a small section of the roof, he noticed Lila watching him from the garden. She held her notebook and pen, sketching the house as he worked. Her movements were deliberate, her eyes intent on capturing the details. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest as he realized she was including him in her drawings, not as a background figure but as someone essential to the scene. He waved at her, unsure whether she would notice, and she smiled, signing back. "I see you." The words, though silent, struck him deeply. He had spent years feeling invisible, unnoticed, and unappreciated. And now, here was a young girl who had come into his life as a stranger, showing him that she saw him, not just as someone who provided her shelter, but as a person with worth and presence. Evenings became a special time for them. They would sit near the fireplace, Lila sketching while Ethan read or worked on small tasks. Sometimes he would ask her questions in writing or attempt to communicate with simple signs. She always responded patiently, never rushing, never judging. And slowly, their shared silence deepened into a quiet intimacy neither of them could have predicted. One night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Ethan noticed a shadow at the door. Lila's father had returned. This time he was sober, though his face carried the weight of guilt, regret, and uncertainty. Ethan's first instinct was protectiveness. He stepped forward, ready to confront him, but Lila placed a gentle hand on his arm, signing, "I can handle this. Please trust me." Her calm confidence surprised Ethan. She led her father inside, speaking to him with a patience that Ethan had not expected. Her gestures were firm yet kind, communicating boundaries and expectations with clarity. Her father, humbled and repentant, listened. He promised to seek help, to change, and to respect her independence. Lila's quiet strength had brought a difficult situation to resolution, without confrontation or anger. Ethan felt a surge of admiration and a twinge of humility. He realized that this young girl, whom he had initially taken in out of obligation, possessed courage, wisdom, and resilience far beyond her years. Days after the encounter with her father, Ethan found himself reflecting on Lila's presence more deeply. He realized that her influence in his life was profound. She had opened his eyes to the beauty of small moments, the value of patience, and the importance of trust. He began to see himself in new ways, less as a lonely, isolated man and more as someone capable of care, empathy, and connection. One afternoon, Lila prepared tea for them in the garden. The sun was warm and the gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers. She had placed 2 cups on the small wooden table and gestured for Ethan to sit. They sat side by side, sharing a quiet moment that required no words. Ethan watched her hands move as she adjusted the cups, noticed the faint smile on her lips, and felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. "You make the house alive," he signed awkwardly, pointing to the walls, the garden, and the simple comforts she had created. Lila's eyes lit up and she signed back. "It was already alive. I just help it show." Her words, though simple, resonated deeply. Ethan realized that he had been living in a house full of walls and silence for so long that he had forgotten how to notice life, beauty, and joy. Lila had not just cleaned the house, she had restored his sense of wonder, his ability to care, and his willingness to trust again. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Ethan found himself sharing pieces of his past, fragments of memories he had long buried. He told her about his childhood, the friends he had lost, the mistakes he had made, and the loneliness that had become his companion. Lila listened silently, responding with gentle gestures, sketches, or a reassuring touch on his arm. She never judged, never criticized, only offered her presence as a form of understanding. One evening, as they walked through the forest behind the house, Lila stopped to observe a small bird perched on a branch. Ethan watched her, noticing the careful way she crouched, keeping her movements slow so as not to frighten it. She smiled at the bird, then at him, and signed, "Life is fragile. Be gentle." Ethan felt the weight of her words, and in that moment he realized how much he had changed since she arrived. He had been hardened by life, guarded by pain, and closed off from the world. Yet now he was learning to be gentle again, gentle with himself, with others, and even with the world around him. Challenges continued to arise, of course. There were moments of frustration, misunderstandings, and small mistakes. Ethan sometimes struggled to express himself in signs, and Lila occasionally misinterpreted his written notes. But these moments never lasted long. They always resolved with patience, communication, and understanding. In their shared effort to navigate these small difficulties, their bond deepened. Each challenge became an opportunity for trust, empathy, and growth. One particularly quiet night, Ethan found Lila sitting by the fireplace, her sketchbook open, drawing the flickering flames. He joined her, and for a while they simply shared the warmth of the fire. He signed slowly, pointing to the sketch, "You see the world beautifully." Lila's eyes softened, and she signed back, "I only notice what is already here. You just didn't see before." Ethan realized that she was right. He had been living in a world filled with walls, routines, and silence. But he had not truly seen the beauty around him. Lila had taught him to notice, to observe, to care, and to connect. Over the next few weeks, Ethan began to take small steps in change. He allowed himself to smile more, to laugh quietly at small things, and even to reach out to neighbors or friends he had long avoided. Lila's presence gave him courage, not by pushing him, but by quietly showing him that life could be meaningful. Even after years of loneliness, one evening, as they walked back from the garden after watering plants, Ethan paused and looked at her. The sunset cast a warm glow across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and connection. He signed slowly, "You have changed my life." Lila looked at him with her calm, steady gaze and signed back, "We change each other." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to feel gratitude, affection, and a quiet, unspoken love, not romantic, not demanding, but the kind of bond that could survive silence, distance, and time. In the following days, they continued to build routines and rituals that were uniquely theirs. Mornings filled with breakfast by the window, afternoons spent gardening or repairing the house, evenings by the fireplace with sketches and reading. Every gesture, every glance, every shared moment reinforced their connection. The house, once a place of isolation, had become a sanctuary, not only for Lila but also for Ethan. He realized that life had brought them together for reasons beyond repayment, guilt, or obligation. Lila had entered his world quietly, without demand or expectation, and had shown him that trust, patience, and understanding could open even the most guarded heart. She had not just cleaned his house or organized his life, she had restored his ability to feel, to notice, and to care, and in that realization, Ethan understood something profound. The walls he had built around his heart were no longer necessary. Lila's presence had shown him that connection, even in silence, was far more valuable than isolation. He had learned to see, to listen, and to share life in a way he had forgotten was possible. As night fell, Ethan and Lila sat by the fireplace, the warmth of the flames reflecting the quiet glow in their hearts. They shared a silence that spoke volumes, a shared understanding, a bond of trust, and a connection deeper than words. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt that he was truly home. The house had changed. Ethan had changed. And together, in shared silence and quiet moments, they were discovering the meaning of trust, friendship, and the courage to open their hearts again. The house was no longer silent. Every corner carried the echoes of small, meaningful moments. The soft rustle of pages as Lila drew, the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen, and the quiet creak of Ethan's boots as he moved from room to room. The walls, once bare and cold, were now decorated with sketches, flowers, and memories. It was not just a house anymore. It was a home built on trust, care, and shared life. Ethan had changed profoundly over the months. He no longer avoided the world or closed himself off from people. The walls he had built around his heart had slowly crumbled, brick by brick, through quiet gestures, shared silences, and moments of understanding. Lila had done more than fulfill her duties as a housekeeper. She had opened his eyes to life, love, and the possibility of connection again. On a bright morning, the two of them worked together in the garden. Lila had planted new flowers along the fence and Ethan was helping her water them. Sunlight streamed down, highlighting the vibrant colors of the blossoms and the soft green of the grass. Ethan paused to admire her work. She knelt in the soil, her hands steady and careful, shaping the earth with precision and care. "You are amazing," he signed awkwardly, pointing to her hands and the growing flowers. Lila looked up, her face lighting up with a soft smile. She signed back, "We make it together." The words were simple yet profound. Ethan realized that life was not about doing everything alone, nor was it about expecting perfection from others. It was about shared effort, patience, and trust. He had spent so long protecting himself from hurt that he had forgotten the joy of collaboration, of building something meaningful with someone else. Later that afternoon, a knock echoed at the door. Ethan opened it to find a neighbor, an older woman who had often been curious about the quiet house at the edge of town. She smiled warmly and handed over a small basket of baked goods. "I see your garden blooming," she said, pointing toward the yard. "And I hear there's someone helping you. It looks like life has returned here." Ethan looked at Lila, who was standing behind him, smiling shyly. He nodded, realizing that the woman was right. Life had returned, not just in the garden, not just in the walls, but in their hearts. He gestured toward the woman, introducing Lila with careful signs and a few spoken words. Though communication was slow at first, the neighbor understood quickly and soon. They were laughing quietly together, the warmth spreading through the house. That evening, Ethan and Lila sat by the fireplace as they often did, reflecting on the day. He handed her a notebook, filled with sketches and notes he had made in an attempt to communicate more clearly. She flipped through it, her eyes widening at some of the drawings. Some were of the garden, some of small improvements he had made in the house, and some were portraits of the two of them together, drawn quietly and secretly during their shared moments. "You remembered?" she signed softly, her voice replaced by the gentleness of her hands. Ethan smiled a little awkwardly, feeling the warmth of connection stronger than ever before. "Yes, you are important," he signed back, his hands trembling slightly with emotion. Lila's eyes softened and she placed her hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture of acknowledgement and mutual understanding. Their bond continued to deepen. Every day brought new lessons about patience, empathy, trust, and care. Ethan discovered the joy of simple activities such as cooking together, tending the garden, or walking through the forest nearby. Lila, in turn, grew more confident, her independence strengthened by the safety and support Ethan provided. Together they were building not just a home, but a life built on mutual respect and the quiet beauty of shared moments. One night, as the sky darkened and stars appeared, Ethan and Lila sat outside on the porch, watching the constellations. Lila had brought her sketchbook and began drawing the stars, connecting them into shapes that represented hope, life, and dreams. Ethan watched her, feeling a sense of awe and gratitude he could not fully express in words. "You see more than I do," he signed, pointing to the drawing. Lila smiled softly, her hands moving gracefully. "I only notice what is already here. You just help it appear." Ethan's chest tightened. She was right. He had always been blind to the small wonders of life, too focused on solitude, past regrets, and walls built for protection. But now with her he saw, he noticed, he felt, and it was beautiful. The days continued to pass with quiet joy and subtle excitement. One morning, Ethan noticed that Lila had left a small plant on the table with a note. "For you. Thank you for trust." He read it carefully, his heart swelling with gratitude. For years, he had feared that trust was fragile, dangerous, or impossible, and yet here it was, a living proof that connection could grow even in the most unlikely places. But the world beyond the house still waited, and challenges occasionally emerged. Lila's father, though changed and sober, occasionally struggled with his past habits. Yet Lila faced these moments with courage, communicating firmly and calmly, and Ethan watched, learning from her example. She had taught him more than he could ever have imagined. How to face life with patience, strength, and resilience. One evening, as autumn leaves fell around the house, Ethan reflected on everything that had happened. The house, once a symbol of isolation and fear, was now full of life. Lila, once a stranger brought by obligation, had become a companion, a teacher, and a friend. And in their shared journey, Ethan realized that the greatest gift was not in repayment or duty, but in the bond they had formed, in the lives they had quietly built together. That night, as they sat by the fireplace, Ethan reached for Lila's hand. She looked at him, her calm eyes meeting his, and he signed slowly, "You saved me." Lila's lips curved into a gentle smile, and she signed back, "We saved each other." Ethan felt a surge of emotion he could not fully describe. He had lived so long in silence, in isolation, and in fear of disappointment, but now, in the presence of someone who had quietly touched his heart, he understood the meaning of connection, trust, and care. They had built something extraordinary, not through words or obligations, but through patience, understanding, and shared life. In the weeks that followed, the house continued to thrive. Ethan and Lila planted new flowers, repaired old furniture, and created spaces where both could feel safe and happy. Their routines became small rituals, filled with laughter, quiet conversations, and signs and gestures that spoke volumes. Every corner of the house reflected their shared life, a life built on trust, hope, and mutual care. Neighbors noticed the change as well. The once dark house now had flowers outside, warm lights in the windows, and an inviting presence. People who had been wary of Ethan began to greet him, noticing the shift in his demeanor and the gentle energy Lila brought to the home. Yet Ethan remained focused not on approval but on the quiet, steady happiness they had created together. One crisp evening, Lila prepared a small meal for them, setting the table carefully with candles and freshly baked bread. They ate together, laughing silently, enjoying the simplicity of the moment. Afterward, they walked in the garden, the stars above reflecting in their eyes. Lila pointed to a particularly bright star and signed, "Hope is always here." Ethan nodded, understanding. Hope had always been present, but he had been too lonely, too cautious, and too afraid to notice. Lila had taught him to see it, to embrace it, and to share it, and so life continued. The house was alive, their bond unbreakable, and their hearts open. Ethan no longer feared loneliness, disappointment, or the world beyond the walls. He had found a companion, a teacher, and a friend. Lila had entered his life quietly, without demand or expectation, and had transformed it entirely. In the warmth of the home, surrounded by the soft glow of the fire and the gentle presence of someone who cared, Ethan finally felt complete. Loneliness was gone. Silence was no longer empty. And in Lila, he had found not only a housekeeper but a true friend, a part of his life that he would cherish forever. Together, they had created a new beginning, one built on patience, love, and the quiet power of understanding. And in that shared life, they discovered the most extraordinary truth. Sometimes, the most profound connections are the ones that speak without words, touch without hands, and heal without notice. The house was no longer lonely, and neither was Ethan.